Good afternoon, Co-Chairman and members of the Commission. My name is Nick Lima. I'm the Registrar and Director of Elections for the City of Cranston Board of Canvassers, and I'm currently also serving as the Redistricting Coordinator for the city, working with the Redistricting Commission for Cranston that was established in the spring. As you know, the census, as Mr. Brace pointed out, the census data was only released a couple of weeks ago, but the Cranston Redistricting Commission began meeting in May, mostly because in Cranston, we have a new charter amendment that was just passed by voters in 2020 to help us better define our wards and precincts in the city, using communities of interest and neighborhoods as a starting point. So while we were waiting basically for that late census data to come in August, what we were able to do in Cranston is hold a series of public hearings and public feedback sessions in order to draw probably the first ever in the history of the city map of neighborhoods in Cranston that we're going to use to guide us in the redistricting process at the local level over the course of the next several months. I don't have that to share with the members of the commission here today, though I look forward to perhaps at another public comment session at a future hearing. I could share that data with the members of the commission and also the map as well, because we feel that's important to utilize that map not only for drawing lines at the ward level in the city of Cranston, but it could also be very helpful to this commission when it comes time to draw or redraw representative and Senate lines and even congressional lines that may cross the city.
Mr. Lima, in that light, while you're on this point, would you just amplify on how you defined communities of interest? You don't have to expound on it greatly, but just a little bit for our edification.
Mr. Brace was quite right in that it's a very difficult term to define because it can be really up to anyone's interpretation of what a community of interest is. It could be as small as a few neighbors that live together on a cul-de-sac. It could be as large as Mr. Brace pointed out, an entire community, entire city or town. I think the real struggle with defining what a community interest is the overlap portion of that. There could be a racial minority group that lives in a particular area of a city that could be defined as a community of interest. At the same time, there could also be a religious group that settled in an area a century ago and has maintained an established presence in a particular area of a community. That could be a community of interest too. A community of interest could be defined as a school district or even going into the election administration realm, a precinct or a voting district. You've got a number of people that are represented by the same people in government, and that could be defined as a community of interest. So really, to answer your question specifically, there's a lot of different definitions, and they are all very much valid.
Not that I want to hold you to it, but in your testimony, before you continue, how small in number did you define communities of interest? Mr. Brace said they went down to 100. What number did you come up with, and how did you do it?
So the Board of Canvassers around the state for the 39 cities and towns, and particularly those towns that are divided into multiple precincts, which is just about every town, and those several towns that are divided into wards, have an elections administration role that we have to look out for. And that's always our primary concern when we go to draw our ward lines as well as our precinct lines. Under the enabling legislation that established this commission, it is defined as 100 people in terms of the minimum precinct size. However, when we look at an elections administration, if we're going to staff a polling location, find an ADA compliant and accessible polling location that makes sense for a particular small neighborhood or community, we try to shoot for a number of about 1,000. So in Cranston in particular, we have 60,000 registered voters. That 1,000 is the minimum size that we would like to see as a polling place. Now, I can tell you right now, we have 30 precincts in Cranston. There are several that are well below 1,000. There are even a couple that are below 500. We don't have any that are below 100. I know there are a couple in Providence. But for the most part, that 1,000 is the minimum number. There is a maximum number in state law. And Rhode Island General Law 1711-1 sets the maximum precinct size at 3,000 voters. Now, that's not total population. One interesting note about redistricting is that simultaneously with this process at the state level and at the local level with ward boundaries, local election officers will have to conduct this precincting process, and hopefully at the end of the day, everything kind of lines up and we don't end up with a lot of overlap. We don't end up with a lot of pocket precincts. That 3,000 number, the high-end number for a precinct, is based off of a law that was passed in the previous redistricting process a decade ago. And if you look at the trends over the last several years, not just in 2020, but even going back to 2014, 2016, the increased use of mail ballots, and now with the establishment and increased use of in-person emergency voting, the number of voters, of course, that we see on election day, whereas in the past it could have been 90 to 95% of registered voters, is now maybe 60% or 50% actually showing up in person at a precinct polling place on election day. So for us, when we look at drawing precincts in Cranston, I think I speak for a lot of my colleagues in the cities and towns, that 3,000 number is now artificially low because we wouldn't expect 3,000 people to show up and vote at a polling place on election day. We now know that maybe a third or more of voters may vote by mail, a third or more may vote early in person at their local elections office, and then another third or so may vote on election day. So one thing that actually I wanted to ask this commission to keep in mind and consider as you go through the process, and ultimately for the legislature as a whole to consider, preferably in January, is perhaps considering amending that law to increase that precinct cap at the high end. Because while, like I said, when we set up a polling place, when we set up a polling location, logistically, it's much easier for election administrators if you have around 1,000 or so people at the low end. Because that keeps the total number of precincts we have down. We don't have to recruit quite as many poll workers, which is not the easiest thing to do in this day and age. But at the high end, we also want to make sure that cap, that 3,000 cap, is raised 3,500, 4,000, whatever the appropriate number is above that, so that we have flexibility when we go to draw those precincts. When this commission finishes its work over the course of this winter, and at the local level, the 39 cities and towns have to draw their precincts, that we have options available to us to make sure that we don't have too many polling locations and not opening up polling locations that aren't really necessary or needed when one polling place could easily be centrally located and serve a community. So that's actually, Chairman, that's your question brought me right to my concluding point, which was just that, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that the commission members have.
Yeah, thank you. If you would be so kind as to send that over in writing, I jot notes and I'm putting down the statute and the other stuff, but if you'd send something over in writing to the committee, we'd all have it, and we could reflect on it as we move forward. Appreciate your testimony. Any questions for Mr. Lima from any members of the committee? Hearing none, thank you very much, Mr. Lima.
Thank you.